All right, so sometimes I will question, I will ask myself, am I just too pessimistic about politics? Do I just have an overly dark interpretation of the US empire? And I'll start to doubt myself and some of the critiques that I have. And then I'll see an article like this. Okay, so here from The Guardian. The US rejects calls for regulating or banning killer robots. Okay, hold on. Let me just say that again. US rejects calls for regulating or banning killer robots. Okay, so not even just like technological advancements or any robots that would be used in a logistical or support or defensive context in military. No, just literally killer robots, okay? Like the exact on-the-nose iteration of every single warning that we have gotten in the entire history of dystopian sci-fi. Okay, so let's just go ahead and read some of the details because maybe it gets a little bit more reasonable here. So they say, the US has rejected calls for a binding agreement regulating or banning the use of killer robots, instead proposing a non-binding code of conduct at the United Nations. Now, I'm not a foreign policy expert, but as we're going to get into in a couple examples here in a minute, the US is not exactly great at following codes of conduct or even international law. So, not exactly something I would be inclined to trust them at face value, at following the guidelines within some sort of a non-binding code of conduct. But they continue here saying that speaking at a meeting in Geneva, focused on finding common ground on the use of so-called lethal autonomous weapons, a US official balked at the idea of regulating their use through a legally binding instrument. So again, we're not just talking about any robots, okay? We're not just talking about like surveillance drones or something like that. We're talking about lethal autonomous weapons, and they're going to give a little definition here of exactly what that means. But they point out that activists and a number of countries have called for an all-out ban on any weapons that could use lethal force without a human overseeing the process and making the final kill order. Okay, so that seems pretty goddamn benign to me. Okay, that seems like a pretty major compromise that we could maybe be making. Okay, maybe we shouldn't have killer robots that just have free license to roam around and kill people without any human oversight whatsoever. I really don't think that this should have to be said, but apparently it does if you are, talking to U.S. State Department officials. But they continue here saying that in November of 2018, the UN chief Antonio Guterres joined the call for a ban, but so far, countries do not even agree on whether there is a need to regulate the weapons. Okay, so can't even agree on regulation. Not even just not willing to ban them, okay, in terms of like, oh, we don't want to disarm ourselves because our adversaries could have these spooky weapons. But on top of that, you're not even willing to regulate them. So what do you mean you're not willing to regulate them? So this is all coming in the wake, okay? Take this in context of this very bizarre onslaught or wave of seeming propaganda videos that we have been seeing come out from a lot of these manufacturers like Boston Dynamics, who make the types of robots that are then going to be contracted out to police and military forces around the world. They have been doing many different versions of the video that I'm about to show you right here of a dancing robot dog. Okay, so they've been doing this with all different sorts of robots. They have this robot dog version. They have another one that kind of looks like a human. It's really all like at surface level super dystopian. And I'm saying this as a guy who's not opposed to technological advancement. I'm not opposed to even robots in this type of context. Okay, if they're dancing around, that's fine. But as you're about to see later on in this clip that they insert there with a little, 2-second mention, these are not in fact just going to be dancing robots. So let's just go ahead and watch a little bit of this to give you a perspective in terms of the types of, weird, bizarre, dystopian videos they've been putting out.
C-spot dance. Again? And not just one spot, 7 spots dancing before your eyes. The Boston Dynamics Robo-Dogs matching the 7 members of the Korean pop group BTS.
Yeah. Okay, so cut this shit out. All right, cut this shit out. Again, not opposed to technological advancements, don't have beef with robots yet, but cut this shit out, okay? We're talking about showing a dancing robot dog that is going to be used, as they point out later here, in military and police context, okay? So again, they snipped this in here, but this is the only mention that they have of what these robots are most likely going to be actually contracted out to be doing. So they mention it here.
It's been tested by police bomb squads and even the French military. As for the video...
Oh, that was it. That was it. That was the only mention in this entire over 2-minute long clip. That 2-second snippet there is the only time that they mention in this compilation of robots dancing next to BTS members. They only mention it for 2 seconds that it's going to be used by the French military and police forces. Okay, so first of all, they pointed out in like a bomb squad situation here, but there are going to be many different situations where these types of dogs or types of robots are going to be used and even weaponized in offensive ways by these military and police units. And again, it isn't just in France. Okay, this is something that happened in New York. If you guys remember, I think I did a video that was covering this, but the NYPD actually had to back off this robot dog that they put out into the streets, and they were testing to be able to add to their police department, which is already completely inflated and ridiculous in terms of their budget and military grade equipment. But they got a fucking robot dog, they put it out onto the streets and expected people to just go along with this. Now, thankfully, there was pushback and they had to back off using this, but look at what Jamal Bowman has to say here, because I think he was 100% right in terms of just how ridiculous this was.
This is crazy. Robot police dogs walking down the street.
Look at that. Look at that fucking dog and tell me you don't want to punt it into the atmosphere. Okay, listen, we got to go to war with these types of robots, okay? And it's not just that, like, they're going and walking around and maybe doing surveillance. It looks like this one might have a camera on the top of it. It's not just going to be like this, okay? Give it a decade, give it 5 years, and the NYPD is going to be fully staffed with humanoid robots that are going around and beating the shit out of homeless people, okay? That's kind of the trajectory that is becoming glaringly obvious. And again, this is coming at a time where the US, the most powerful and wealthy country on the face of the planet, won't even commit to regulating, not even just banning, but regulating killer robots. Again, and this is coming from the same US empire that has basically the worst track record in terms of using offensive, lethal military support, and how effective we are at doing that. So we just had this one major example that just came out thanks to this investigative piece by the New York Times, but they say how the US hit an airstrike that killed dozens of civilians in Syria. The military never conducted an independent investigation into a 2019 bombing on the last bastion of the Islamic State, despite concerns about a secretive commando force. Okay, so basically the rundown on this was, and we didn't know this thanks to the military, we only knew this thanks to this investigative piece, but basically at the end of the Trump administration, they had ISIS-K fighters pushed up against the Euphrates River in Syria, and there was also an encampment that had tons of innocent men, women, and children that were just there in the encampment that didn't necessarily have any affiliation with ISIS whatsoever. Now, there was a secretive task force that I think was associated with former Navy SEALs and the CIA, and this secretive task force unilaterally called in an airstrike on this encampment and ended up just obliterating dozens of innocent civilians. I think it was estimated upwards of 90 innocent civilians were killed in that strike. Now, we didn't find out about it until like just a couple months ago, okay? And the reason for that is there was a massive cover-up, there was no legitimate investigation, and nobody ever fucking found out about it, okay? The public certainly didn't find out about it. So this is the type of accountability that we have baked within the US empire, okay? We had that other example under the Joe Biden administration while he was leaving Afghanistan, rightfully so, but one of the last things that he did there in terms of a strike that he launched was he struck an innocent aid worker and his family, killing 7 innocent children in a strike that our top general, General Mark Milley, called a righteous strike that he claimed at the time and lied about, that killed an ISIS-K suicide bomber, okay? Again, there was no ISIS-K suicide bomber, and there wasn't any, necessarily any ISIS members that were within the dozens of innocent civilians that were killed in this Syria strike. Now, these are not exceptions to the rule. These are the rule, okay? Killing innocent civilians is kind of the specialty of the US empire, okay? And so this is the common statistic that everybody throws around, but there was a 5 to 6 month period under the Obama administration, under his drone program, where we were killing 90% innocent civilians, okay? This is not a track record where it's like, oh, sometimes we get it wrong, sometimes there's faulty intelligence, we make mistakes. This is like, you gotta scrap the whole fucking military and start from the beginning, because this is not even remotely close. You're not even talking about having a positive ratio. You're talking about just basically only killing innocent civilians with no oversight, no accountability, and nobody ever gets punished for these things. Okay, so is this the type of military, is this the type of military apparatus and accountability structure that you think is going to be capable of designing an algorithm to then make these types of decisions that our own military personnel can't make? Okay, of course they're not. Of course they're not. There is no magic algorithm that is going to be, looking from the sky, whether it's a drone or whether it's on the ground with one of those fucking robot dogs with a AR-15 strapped to its back. Whatever iteration this weird dystopian reality is going to take form, it is not going to be effective at counterterrorism, just in the same way that the US military right now is not effective at counterterrorism. Okay, so listen, again, I'm not the type of guy who's anti-technology or anti-advancement or even anti-robot in any way yet, okay? We'll see how this all unfolds, but yet, okay? But this is just so beyond the pale that it's a joke, all right? It's like they want us to view the US empire as dystopian a light as physically possible, okay? It's not even just you're not regulating robots or you're not regulating drones, you're not regulating killer robots. This is like the one thing that we have been told over and over and over again in every dystopian sci-fi movie. Hey, maybe don't create, killer robots that are autonomous and able to, eradicate human life based on their own decisions. That seems like it should be a pretty low bar to clear, and yet it somehow is a bar that the US empire is not able to clear.